Talk Show. Recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. And this week, we continue our look at giant monsters with King Kong, directed by Marion Cooper. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, writer of the current Ben 10 comic series from IDW, which is out in trade paperback right now. With me from Austin is Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man from Monsterverse Comics and a contributing writer to Rockabilly Online and Monsterverse's Tales from the Grave. Say hello, Drew.
Tonight I want to be known as Drew, the eighth wonder of the world.
Drew, the eighth wonder of the world, is so excited to talk about this movie. So excited. All right, also in Austin, Tony Salvaggio, writer of the Victorian Met comic Clockworks from Humanoids and Psychon, the manga from Right Stuff and Tokyo Pop. Say hello, Mr. Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Drew's busting at his chains to talk about this movie.
God, I actually am super excited. I can hear it in my own voice. It's making me trip over myself, and I apologize. And also in Denver with color commentary, as always, host of the mom-oriented podcast Pod Moms, Attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Hola.
Hola. Okay. According to Wikipedia, King Kong, we're talking about the 1933 King Kong, is an American fantasy monster adventure film directed by Marion Cooper and produced by Ernest Schoedsack. It stars Fay Wray, Bruce Cabot, and Robert Armstrong. The film tells of a gigantic island-dwelling ape called Kong who dies in an attempt to possess a beautiful young woman. Kong is distinguished for its stop-motion animation by Willis O'Brien and its musical score by Max Steiner, which is a wall-to-wall score. The film has been released many times, and there's even a colorized version, and many people cite this as one of the greatest films of all time. The Library of Congress deemed it in 1991 a culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant film, and it's been remade twice. There's a 1976 one and also a 2005 one, and we might get into those, although I don't know if we can handle the arguments that will ensue. And there's also like half a billion other movies that feature Kong or a Kong-alike. But this is sui generis. We're going to talk about the 1933 King Kong. Let's get first impressions. And, gang, what do you think? I mean, Drew is clearly the most excited to talk, so do we want to give him the first impression, or do we give him the last first impression to set the stage? I'm inclined to give you the stage right away, Drew, and then we can just sort of mop up afterwards.
Go for it.
So let's do Drew and then Tony. Actually, we'll mix it up. Drew and then Julia and then Tony, and then I may skip myself. So, Drew, first impressions, if there is such a thing, King Kong.
This movie was bought to me when I was a little boy back in the 80s. My mom bought a VHS tape of this, and she would put it on when she wanted to keep me occupied. And this is one of those kind of love at first sight things, because this movie had basically everything a little boy could want. It has, a giant monster. It has pretty girls. It has tough guys talking like tough guys. And it has dinosaurs. It's like maybe the biggest appeal of all is as this lost island filled with dinosaurs. And I've always loved like the Lost World scenario too. And I was just saying to Jason before we started recording, if I had to make a list of my top 10 favorite movies, this would always be on it. I love King Kong. I'm so excited to talk about this. And I just think it's a great movie. And I watched it twice in preparing for this. It's entertaining every time I watch it. I pretty much I don't think there's a month that goes by where I don't put it on just as like background noise while I'm writing, because I always kind of take something away from this movie that inspires me to create. And frankly, I find like there's almost like a very dreamlike quality about this movie if you watch it with the volume turned way down. So in that respect, just this visual eye candy, I love this movie. I could ramble on just like writing a love affair, like my love letter to King Kong, which amazing film.
Wow, that's fantastic. All right, and that's a really great way to kick us off. Julia, do you have any any opening thoughts about King Kong?
Sure, of course. I had never seen this. I was actually the one who pushed to do this movie in this retrospective, so I didn't know that Drew was such a big fan. Because I was like, we gotta incorporate King Kong. I'm so glad we did it. I totally agree with Drew. It's a fantastic movie. I was really quite pleasantly surprised. I mean, I knew it was going to be a good movie because I'd heard great things about it, but it's just such a combination of wonderfulness. Like, I love, for a lot. Well, first of all, it takes a long time before. Once again, like we've been talking about with the others, it takes a long time for him even to show up. I mean, it's like 45 minutes in, I think. And so there's a lot of character development, and the characters are actually interesting. And then I thought King Kong, the creature is so adorable, and then he does these horrific things.
Yes.
So it is a horror movie, even though because the stop motion animation is just fun to watch. It's cute. I mean, you can't, even though it's like these giant monsters, they feel cute. But then when he's doing all these horrific things, it's like, oh my gosh, no, this is legitimately a horror movie. So it was great, and it was I really, really enjoyed it.
Wow, that's great. Okay, Tony, opening thoughts. King Kong.
Yeah, I don't know what else I could say. It's awesome. I mean, it's a classic. So much, so many things going on, like special effects wise, as well as just what they were trying to do, how epic it is. I mean, it's, I think it's one of the early film achievements as far as, monster movies, anything related to this podcast especially.
I was struck by how much stop motion there is. It just I have no idea how long it was, but I thought surely, Tony, as a character animator, you must have been struck by just the tremendous work that would go into moving. There's so many monsters going on, and Kong is just constantly being animated.
It's pretty amazing. Just what I like about this and a few others that, we talked a little bit about in our Harryhausen retrospective was the really good animators when you did really good stop motion. They were acting through the stop motion, puppets.
Yes.
Through the statuettes, however you want to call it. And it's the really good guys were able to pull off these great character moments no matter what beasts were on screen. And, you don't always see that. I mean, there's really good character animation in CG in some movies. Some movies are better than others. But almost all of the really good, stop motion movies, the acting comes through, and it's pretty amazing. So.
Well, I mean, think of like stop motion characters that have, like, if you think of somebody like the Terminator, the moments when you're looking at a stop motion Terminator, and it doesn't really convey anything. But you think about the stop motion characters that we saw in a number of the Harryhausen pictures, and the business that they'll put into these characters, like the giant statue, as it just kind of like looks around and lifts its feet and tries to figure out where the humans are hiding. There's a cleverness and a curiosity that shows you intelligence on the part of these characters. Same thing with Kong. The way they convey, and this is my first impression, I just loved watching Kong in this movie. How constantly they've the animator has conveyed Kong's personality in terms of his raw intelligence as an ape. So he's confused by the modern world, but generally he's a smart ape, and you see him sort of puzzling with stuff and sort of tinkering with ideas and and playing around with the creatures that he kills and stuff like that. There's he's a very interesting character, and I had no idea that was gonna sort of come around. I didn't know that was coming. So the movie is basically divided up into three parts. You have the beginning, which involves meeting Carl Denham. And as soon as I say what these three parts are, then I want us to get right into talking about Carl Denham. The major characters are Carl Denham, who is a director of films, generally travelogues, but he's been pressured by the money interests to get a romance into his new travelogue. He's going to go to a secret island where he's heard some legends, and he wants to bring a girl, and because he thinks that'll give the movie a romance element. This is all sort of very loosely sketched, but the bottom line is, he's been under pressure to introduce romance in his movies, and he goes out in the middle of the Depression, and he finds Ann Darrow, this extraordinarily beautiful.
After rejecting all the women who were in line for the
soup kitchen.
For the soup kitchen.
Yes. He meets a pickpocket girl. Anyway, so this first section just involves gathering his team, gathering his crew on this big bucket of bolts ship that's going to go out into near Indonesia, and following a rumor that they've heard. And so the first part of it is the voyage. The second part of the movie, after the voyage, they reach the island, and they go onto the island, and they encounter an indigenous tribe of Indonesians, very, very African-American looking Indonesians, who worship and sacrifice humans to a giant ape god, which they are alarmed to find out is a real, honest-to-God giant ape god behind a great big wall. And this whole middle section of the movie involves exploring this island and finding out all the mysteries that are to be found there. We're going to get into that a little bit. But, they have a lot of crazy stuff that I totally did not remember was in this. And then the third part is, like Gulliver, they tie Kong up. He's a giant ape. And they bring him back to New York, and that whole plan doesn't go as well as you might expect, and he gets shot somewhere in...
I'm actually really curious how they pulled off getting him on the ship and getting him to New York, because that part they conveniently gloss over.
By means of a dissolve. By means of just going later.
I don't think you're meant to think about that. That would be my gut instinct.
But so that's the three parts. It's a perfect 3-act movie. There's the beginning, which is the voyage, which sets everything up, and you meet the characters. There's the middle, which is big-time adventure on this island with mysterious creatures from the distant past and giant apes and so forth. And then you have the modern city at the end, and it's so well put together, and it just clips along, boom, boom, boom. So. I want to talk, first of all, that's the basic synopsis. But before we get to Carl, I actually wanted to ask, what had you guys forgotten? Each of us had seen King Kong at some time before.
Well, I hadn't seen the original.
Okay, you had not seen it.
I'd only seen the new one.
So for you, the variation I'll give you on this question is, what, watching this movie, really surprised you, considering that you knew the movie existed, but you hadn't seen it? And for the others, this might be tough for you, Drew, but what had you forgotten? Like, what kind of surprised you this time watching it? Julia, go for it. What took you by surprise?
So, did you say me?
Yes.
Okay. I was surprised, like I said, that it was so horrific. Like the fact that because even now, we'll have some gory films, but we don't have him just putting people in his mouth and just eating them, throwing them off of buildings. He's like, oh, you're not Ann Darrow, them throwing you down to the concrete. It's really gruesome and horrible, the things he does. And also there's so many, I didn't know there were going to be so many monsters in it. Like, I didn't understand that there was, this island included T-Rexes and giant, snakes, like serpent, like lizard guys. And so all that stuff, Mothra, not a Mothra, what do you call it? What was the one, the pterodactyl?
You're talking about Rodan.
Rodan, like a pterodactyl. Anyway, it's the dinosaur island, and so it's Jurassic Park meets King Kong, except that it's King Kong, of course. So I guess Jurassic Park comes from this. But so I didn't know that. I thought I knew the story of, I knew the whole rest of the story, the island and the bringing them back to New York and all that. But that the actual island and then how just very violent Kong is were big surprises for me.
Very, very good. Okay, Drew, was there anything that you were surprised watching it this time by, or that you were reminded of that had kind of escaped your notice in the past?
Like Julia's saying, I think because we have such empathy for Kong, pretty much every time he falls off the Empire State Building at the end of the movie, you sort of retroactively forget how much he savages people. in this movie. And I feel like with you know, and I'm not going to get too much in it, but every time this story was retold, Kong got more, you know, less and less of a monster and more humanized. And he's very sympathetic here still, because, I mean, you are essentially talking about an instance of animal abuse. But, you know, he's so much more savage and so much more frightening in this movie than he is in any of his other screen appearances. And I think I forget that every time because, you know, I like King Kong so much. You know, I root for him so much. So every time I revisit it, and again, I revisit this movie very often, I sort of, you know, when it comes to the point where he's like tossing people around and putting people in his mouth and all that stuff, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's how it goes down in this one.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I like what you said about the notion that he gets nicer in every telling. This may well, since this is 1933, it's funny, this may well be the most problematic or strangely colored telling, you know.
Well,
because,
and a lot of the scenes, actually, that we're talking about were removed in various re-showings, reissuings of the film. Like all those really violent scenes, they would take them out, put them back in. Well,
there's a moment. So the version that we saw was on this Blu-ray restoration that you know, a big anniversary. Sorry, it wasn't a Blu-ray; it's a DVD, but we got it from the library, and because this movie is not available on streaming that I could find anyway.
No, I got it. I saw it on Amazon actually.
Oh, okay. Did you rent it or was it part of Prime?
Yeah, I rented it.
Okay, so it's there for streaming rental. There we go. All right. So, you know, and so we did have Kong, like, when he goes apeshit, sorry, no pun intended.
You had to say it, didn't you?
That actually was not an intended pun. I swear to God. But no, when he bashes, he gets mad that they've stolen his little blonde doll, and he goes rampaging through the little native town. He's picking people up, and he just puts them in his mouth, not even to like eat them. He just chews them. He doesn't. And we see him do this like 2-3 times. So you know that he's not doing it accidentally. He picks up, you know, a native person and just and then he tosses them back out again.
He squashes them. He steps on them, he doesn't just step on them. He steps on them and rubs his foot in, like as if they're a cigarette he's trying to put out. I mean, he just rubs them in, and like they show this. I'm actually really curious how the poor people, you know, the stunt people, are not getting suffocated by like getting rubbed into the sand by this giant foot.
It was the depression. You didn't complain much if you had a job.
That's right. But okay, but all right. So Tony, what was your like big surprise, if you had any?
I think the same one. Like I remember, you know, like you always see the one where he looks in the window, but you forget, and you know, he pulls her out and takes her. You forget before that he sees another woman and just goes, "Wait, you're not the woman I'm looking for." And he just chunks her. Like, yes, that's it. Is the woman sleeping? She's in her PJs, and then tough luck.
Yes.
King Kong, a giant ape, picks you up and realizes you're not who he's looking for, and just throws you down into the street. Like, whoa, that makes you a little less sympathetic, if not altogether. Like, yeah, you know what, guys with biplanes, maybe not so bad. Maybe, Well,
I do feel like this version, with every retelling, the humans get less and less sympathetic, and the Kong gets more sympathetic, and I feel like that the humans. This is a little bit more even-handed in some ways,
right?
And
or complex.
I mean, we did pull him out. Like, we took him from the island. He never should have left, right? He should have never broken the gate, or like antagonized him. These guys were doing fine before a shipload of, jerks came and messed up the balance.
Well, and that was my big surprise was how clever the script is. Like, it folds in on itself a lot. I don't want to overpaint the literacy of the script, because it's not like the lines are always, literary. But I mean, the script itself is very meta, because it's a jungle adventure kind of movie with giant apes and romance, and you have the character complaining about how he has to do exactly that kind of movie, and it has the characters go. They talk, we're going to go somewhere where no white man has ever been. And they go, and they only really make their own lives and many, many, many more people's lives miserable by doing it. So does he even make the movie? I don't think he makes the movie. No, he doesn't make the movie. He decides. That's
why he decides to take King Kong back with him as sort of I wasn't able to get any footage, but I can take this. The thing that's always bothered me as a fan of this movie is like, well, why just settle for Kong? Why not come back with a fleet of ships and get a zoo filled with dinosaurs?
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
we learn that maybe that's bad.
Oh, wait, he actually does go back. Son of Kong.
Son of Kong.
Oh, yeah,
that's right.
I really think that this is like the prequel to Jurassic Park. I mean, in some ways, because Jurassic Park is just that. It's taking everybody to the island.
The Lost World, the original silent film, The Lost World, actually featured some idiots bringing a T-Rex back to New York.
Well, the Lost World is really, the Conan Doyle novel is really where all this whole genre that we've been talking about kind of evolves from. But in terms of film, Jurassic Park came from this. Jaws, Godzilla, everything comes from Kong. This is the alpha of this genre.
I'm fascinated by the fact that that Japan, for instance, was so fascinated by Kong that the producers, first of all, in 1938, the Japanese did a version. They did a version in 1933 that was silent, that is a lost film, and then in 1938 they did a movie called King Kong in Edo. Edo is the ancient name for Tokyo, and so they did a remake of King Kong, where King Kong, I'm not making this up, rampages through medieval Tokyo, like the giant samurai in Daimajin, and like crushes houses and stuff like this. We don't have this movie anymore because the last copies were destroyed during World War II. But that sounds awesome. I can't. And
where's Toho needs to remake that stat?
Yes, I agree. That'd be a funny trade because we just made a Godzilla, and they could go ahead and make their King Kong in Edo. So here was the biggest surprise to me. I was talking about the script. There's this wonderful line early on from Carl Denham, and after this, I think we should talk about Carl. So
yeah, isn't that what you started out with?
Yes. So Carl Denham is on the ship, and he's been filming the girl and preparing her for this film that he's going to make. And meanwhile, she's sort of falling in love with Bruce Cabot, who is the kind of executive officer on the ship. And Bruce Cabot is a very traditional leading man. He's tough. He's kind of broody.
Hot.
He's very hot. He's a good-looking guy. Way more good-looking than Adrian Brody. No disrespect to Adrian Brody.
I love Adrian Brody.
Oh, I'm sure. But this is an act. Anyway. But he's he's all hard ass, but he's falling in love with Fay Wray. And so Carl Denham, who, amazing to me, is so focused on his career and on doing whatever it is that he's doing that he has no interest in Fay Wray himself. But he says he warns Jack, which is the Bruce Cabot character, about falling in love with Fay Wray. And this is the line he says. He goes, "It's the idea of my picture. The beast was a tough guy, too. He could lick the world, but when he saw beauty, she got him. He went soft. He forgot his wisdom, and the little fellas licked him. Think it over, Jack." And that's, I cannot imagine a more concise synopsis of King Kong, the movie, that there is spoken by Carl Denham before they even get to Kong Island. Is that you have somebody who's king of the world, and because of an obsession with beauty, he's going to be brought low.
Now, I will say that they beat that Beauty and the Beast thing to death in this movie. I mean, they're right down to the end. The poignant line at the end. It was Beauty that killed the Beast. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay, yeah, it's an important line, and it's certainly well known. But they just beat that.
Well, I'm not even sure if it's true. Having just said what I said, I think Tony.
Well, I think biplanes actually killed the beast.
Right.
I know. Well, that's what the line. That's what the line comes after. He says that the planes got him, and then he's like, no.
Yeah, and Tony's probably right.
I really like the fact that they and maybe it might be a bit repetitive, but I always really appreciated all the Beauty and the Beast stuff in this movie.
Yeah.
It speaks to me. It speaks to me, I guess.
The motif is right. Yeah, there's Beauty and the Beast. The blame is wrong. Carl to say that it was Beauty killed the Beast, that's some bullshit. It was these idiots carrying...
Yes, the planes killed him, but if it weren't for Fay Ray, he probably would have been better at fighting because he was trying to kind of protect her. Like, he kept picking up.
It's not for these crazy white men wanting to go and basically exploit the third world and take stuff. I mean, look how Carl... I can't believe that he can be so self-aware and yet so completely blame-shifting, because he tells the audience who pay like boatloads of money to come see the giant ape.
$10 ticket in Depression era.
Yeah, and he says in his world, there's so much colonialism here. He goes, in his world, he was a god, but he's here for your mere amusement or whatever. Right. It's a paraphrase,
Well, I mean, you look at anything you've seen from the era where the big game hunter guys who have just so much crap on their walls that nowadays we're like, whoa, that probably wasn't very cool. Or, hey, you killed off all the dodos. Or, any number of things where we're just like, yeah, that was Kong. I mean, that's the other thing is, like Godzilla 54, even more so, Kong 33 is really of a time, to the point where it's like, well, I never had a woman on the boat. You want Fay Ray to go, well, I've never been on a boat with a jackass.
I really love the way that the people talk in this movie. I don't know if it's even realistic for the way I don't even know if it's even realistic for the time, but the way the dialogue is spoken, there's like something cool about it.
Yeah. No, well, there's certainly that's why kind of flapper stuff comes back, and there's that kind of like tough thing. That's why we still watch these black and white gangster movies. All of this. Yes. All this stuff.
It reminds me of the shtick that Phil Hartman used to do on SNL, where he'd do snappy patter. He and Dennis Miller would sort of pull out sort of 30s sounding snappy patter, where they'd start talking really fast and using their shoulders and sort of enunciating, and it had that whole Howard Hill kind of sound, and that's on display here. Hello, everybody, come in. There's a kind of over performance of it, and that's just fantastic. I mean, I love watching all that. I interrupted.
I mean, I agree with you, Drew, and also, I'm sure there's probably more than a few ships where, and I mean, it's a traditional thing of like women on board, that's trouble for all kinds of reasons. But it's just the way it kind of plays out. Oh, and the other thing I remembered that I had forgotten, Fay Ray, when she's in her like kind of almost Renfest kind of dress, when they're shooting her on the ship, like you forget.
No bra, by the way.
Actresses who were just, I mean, there's a reason she was super hot. Like she is enormously hot. Fay Ray,
whatever happened to Fay Ray?
Beautiful. Yes.
It says in the trivia in the IMDb trivia that they actually had cut those scenes in a couple of versions because they were too risque because of the fact that she wasn't wearing a bra, and you could tell from the. I
mean, have you ever seen Tarzan the Ape? Who here has seen Tarzan the Ape Man?
Oh, it's been a little while, but yeah.
Do you remember the nude swimming in Tarzan the Ape Man? I'm always amazed. You look at these 30s films, and it's before the Hays Code. And so basically what happens is that movies took a great big step backwards. You don't get to the sort of, separate beds and Blondie would never be seen, running around, undressed. But in the 30s, you had a lot of nudity, and then it just all goes away. So that by the time you get to the 50s, everything, you get this impression that they never invented nudity. They had no idea what it was until the 1970s. And that's not the case at all. We had a lot of really risque stuff, and then all of a sudden, government censorship basically stepped in, and there you go. Actually, let me just go out and say I don't remember if the Hays Code is government censorship or if it was industry self-censorship in anticipation of worrying about the government. I don't remember. So,
well, we wouldn't want to sound like we don't know what we're talking about now.
Well, my point is just that I don't like to use the word censorship when it's not state action. So if it wasn't truly state action, then it's not censorship. It was just.
They still call them the censors, though.
They would have called them the censors, but it would have been just an informal usage. It wouldn't be technically.
All right.
Going back to Carl Denham.
Going back to anything better than this discussion of the meaning of censorship, yes.
Well, going back to Carl Denham, this just struck me. He reminds me of some of the guys I know, whom I'm not going to name because that would be tacky. But some of the guys I know in the rockabilly scene who they're well-intended. They love something so much that they destroy it with their love. Carl Denham is this guy, the funny thing is this character is based on Marion C. Cooper, the director. So here's this guy that loves going into the jungle and going into these way off places, and he just wants to share them with the rest of the world. Because he loves it, but he loves it to the point where he's destructive. Like he doesn't. You talk about his lack of self-awareness, and he really just wants to share it, and I really feel like that this particular incarnation of Carl Denham, I don't feel like that's handled as well in the '70s Kong or in the 2005 Kong. Like, I feel like they just sort of make him an out-and-out creep.
Well,
whereas I feel like this guy's charming. Like, you like Carl Denham, even though he's kind of a blowhard.
You want to go along with him. You want to get on his boat and go see this crazy adventure. And it's only later when you realize, whoa, this guy is so monomaniacal that he's very likely to put me and everybody else in danger. But he remains, so he's crazy, and you're afraid you might very well get injured around him. But there's a certain charm about him. And to that, it reminds me of the Richard Attenborough character in Jurassic Park, who, he's a nice guy. He loves his grandchildren. He's not crazy, he's not sadistic.
He's greedy.
But he's greedy, and he has a vision that he really wants to sacrifice a lot of things for.
Well, in some ways, he's like Indiana Jones too, Fortune and Glory.
Absolutely, yes. And right, Indiana Jones absolutely has no problem whatsoever with disrupting the careful balance of traps and tombs that have laid there for like hundreds of years just so he can steal an idol, therefore making the whole place less cool and take it back to a museum. He has no problem with that because he's into this game. Now, the Charles Grodin character, if I recall, was just a loathsome in the 70s version. Charles Grodin was like this loathsome, greedy oil executive who had none of the adventure of Denham. But I have no idea if that might just be my memory of it. I actually
you're absolutely right.
Right.
Like that, having recently rewatched it, like that's the Charles Grodin version in a nutshell. He's just a evil capitalist scumbag. And
the Jack Black character is pretty beholden to this version, I think. I think he seems a little crazy.
He's more insane.
Yeah. There's sort of the wild-eyed Jack Black thing going on in the Peter Jackson version.
Plus, you can't, this guy's more of a man of action. You don't really buy that with Jack Black. This guy seems physically more, he says like, oh, never bother with cameraman. I had a cameraman in Africa, and he ran off when a rhino was charging him.
Right.
Damn fool! I had a rifle right there with me.
Yes.
Well, what
Jack Black can sell that.
I don't know. Jack Black is very physical, though. If you've ever seen him in his band dancing around, he is very physical.
But I don't buy him as like a tough guy. You know, you don't think of Jack Black as a tough guy. This Carl Denham's a tough guy.
I don't know. I could see it. I could see it.
Okay.
But the director actually said that that's his philosophy. Like, remember when we were watching the commentary, he says that when he said that you have to have but that he didn't trust cameramen. He liked it. He's like, that's all me.
Well, and Drew was saying that's why this character is actually very memorable and very specific. It's a real character, is because the screenwriter, who is a female screenwriter, I have no idea if that is common in 1933. But
I would say absolutely not.
She totally patterned this character after the director,
right.
Marion Cooper. You know,
or the producer
was
her husband.
He's one of the ones. He and the producer are the ones who are actually the close-up of the pilots that kill.
Really?
That kill King Kong.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, they're actually when they show the close-ups, it's actually Marion Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack. Yeah.
As interesting as Marion C. Cooper is, and the fact that he was basically, there's this weird autobiographical element to this version of Kong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad his vision was not the only thing we got, because what he wanted was to have a Komodo dragon fight a real gorilla over miniaturized sets, which would have been horrifying. And of course, I don't think we would have been talking about this movie, 70, 80, however, decades after the fact. It wouldn't be the classic that it is. It just would have been like an exploitation kind of thing. And, it was the Depression, so nobody wanted to pay for him to bring wild animals to Hollywood so he could film them fighting on miniatures.
Do we have any data on how long it took to do this animation? I didn't happen to read that in my preparation, but it seems to me that, the middle hour of this movie is almost nonstop monster action.
Well, Willis O'Brien had already made a bunch of dinosaurs for a dinosaur movie, like a dinosaur project that it was, I believe, called Creation or something like that. And so all the dinosaurs that you see in this were dinosaurs he had made for that.
I see.
And that ended up getting tanked in favor of making Kong.
In fact, I want to get now into the character of Kong, but we can start with it in the perspective of Kong being on this island. I love the business when Jack, the Bruce Cabot character, he is chasing after Kong, and Kong is trying to catch him. And it's really funny. There's all this great business with Bruce Cabot like hiding in kind of it's like Kong is on a cliff, an overhang. Bruce Cabot is underneath, and Kong keeps like reaching under and trying to catch him. It's great. And I was thinking, gosh, this is a composite, first of all, because we're looking at half the screen is the actor inside of a cave set, and half the screen is at least partially, if not completely, this miniature set, and they mix them over and over. There's many, many, many composite shots in this movie, and sometimes Bruce Cabot will be replaced with a little claymated person, and it blows my mind, just the fact that there's like literally an hour of animated stuff in here. But the character of Kong. So we first, before, like anything cool, we hear about Kong before we ever see him, because Kong is just this unseen thing that the natives worship, and he's behind a giant, a giant wall, enormous wall. This wall had been built for another movie, and it was redressed as a jungle set. And when Kong finally appears, it's because he's come to retrieve the latest bride that they left for him, which is Fay Ray. And
well, first it's another woman, and then she gets spared in favor of Fay Ray because the islanders kidnap her off of the ship.
Yes, that's right. The way it works is basically the expedition goes down to the island, and they observe the native rituals where they're planning to sacrifice this young woman who's just sitting on a blanket with flowers in her hair and stuff. She's being prepared as, quote, the bride of Kong. And this is all made up, but it's pretty awesome. And they basically they get spotted And so the chief of the natives says, I find Fay Ray enticing. I will trade you several of my girls for Fay Ray. And Carl Denham says, no, thanks. And so they leave. But then that night, the natives come and kidnap Fay Ray anyway. And because they intend to give her to Kong. Now, first of all, all right, I have a few questions. How many times has this happened? Not the Fay Ray part. Let's assume that Fay Ray never showed up. Do we have any inkling, like, how many girls have been sacrificed? Have they been doing this forever?
For hundreds of years.
Do they do this once a week, once a month, once a year? I mean, I'm really curious. Like,
how long does Kong live? Because he appears to be the only one of his kind that we see.
Right.
Yeah, and how long did it take him to figure out that would appease him? Like, how many villagers did he kill before they went, you know what? If we give him a girl, he'll leave the rest of us alone.
And Kong,
then it begs the question: is there anything legitimately supernatural about Kong? Like, is this somehow keeping this creature alive and appeased?
Well, I mean, I don't think he's supernatural. I think he is an ape, and he has ape intelligence.
Except that he's giant.
So he's figured out that these people will occasionally deliver to him a plaything that he can have, and that amuses him enough that he deals with that. Because Kong seems to lead a pretty lonely life. He does appear to be the only giant ape on the island.
He doesn't play well with others.
No, every other creature that he runs into, he fights. Mm-hmm. And now, granted, we only see him doing all of that when he is carrying Fay Ray, and so
screaming.
To some extent, he's protecting Fay Ray from these creatures that would, otherwise eat her. But look, he picks up a little human, like, let's say once a week, or maybe once a month. I have no idea. And so, in theory, this happens all the time. So I can only guess there's a limitless supply of giant reptiles trying to eat the little woman that he picks up periodically and carries off, and I guess does whatever it is that he does until they are dead, and then he comes back and gets another one. I don't think there's a sexual component on the part of the giant ape per se. I think all critics have always pointed out that there's this big sexual thing going on, because clearly Fay Ray is beautiful, and, so what does Kong mean? Does Kong represent slaves? Does he represent whatever? And I have no idea about that, but
I just think he's supposed to be a big ape.
He's a big ape. I think he's just a giant ape, but I think Kong doesn't try to have sex with these women. Kong does play with them. He thinks her skirt's funny. He takes that off. He pokes her and stuff. He thinks she's fascinating. But this Kong is fascinated by everything. When he killed the dinosaur, he moves its head around and stuff just to sort of.
Oh, the T-Rex fight. That may be the best scene in the whole movie. I love that. It's so gross in its way, the way he just cracks its. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I feel like the new Godzilla riffed on this a little bit.
Yeah, totally,
with the way he dispatched.
Right, well then Godzilla breathes fire into the guy's throat, but it's exactly the same shot. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the female Muno, actually.
The girl. Sorry.
But yeah, yes, that is violent. I felt really bad for that lizard when he just really, really crushes the T-Rex. And then just sort of plays with its head, because it finds it all amusing. So, but Kong is so primal that there's an innocence to him. And even the evil things he does are they're not evil. They're just purely animalistic.
Well, if he's truly just an animal, he's not being evil. He's just doing. It's like what they do say in Jurassic Park over and over. They're not monsters. They're just doing what they do.
Yeah. Right. That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, and the onus is on us for messing up what was just natural, right? Maybe we shouldn't have brought dinosaurs back. Maybe we shouldn't be, if we didn't want to get eaten by, crazy creatures, maybe we shouldn't be on Skull Island.
Right.
Or go past the wall that everybody else is smart enough to go, we built this wall.
Yes,
to keep this crap out, right? So here we go. I'm gonna, oh my gosh, everybody's been eaten by dinosaurs and stuff. Wow, maybe that's why that wall was there. You know, and so you kind of, again, you know, as you know, I think Drew's right. As we go more and more modern with the stories, like you feel less and less sympathy for the humans because you know, again, we've kind of realized, like, you know, for the most part, we try not to, you know, shoot a bunch of rhinos, you know, or any, you know, all the stuff. We're kind of like, wow, you know, overhunting and all this stuff. Maybe that was really bad. Well,
we make more
that was
effort.
The picture of the time, right? Like, I mean, a big game hunter, that was an expensive, like, yeah, that's a man's man, you know.
Yeah,
and,
you're right.
And it was kind of changed politically as well, in the way we view those things. But yeah, it's, you know, don't go where the giant, you know, the T-Rexes and pterodactyls and all that are if you don't expect to lose some of your crew. You know, I doubt very many of the crew knew that was going to happen, that's for sure.
I'm not sure if the natives do. Here's my question.
Yeah.
I don't know about the crew. The crew, I think, totally do not expect to get tossed around by a giant ape and eaten by dinosaurs. But they
don't even know where they're going until they're almost there, remember?
Sure.
They're always well, so when are you going to tell us where we're going? And he's like, okay, there's this island. And they're like, well, we know all about the islands. And he said, no, you don't know about this one.
The island, by the way, is patterned after a famous painting called The Isle of the Dead. When it first appears, the painting looks just like Isle of the Dead. And I'm trying to remember. I'm looking it up right now. The name of the.
But it's supposed to be Asian, not African.
Yeah, it's Indonesian.
Yeah,
and if you look at like Indonesian indigenous peoples.
Well, and then remember in the commentary it said that that supposedly there's like a language that they were trying to pattern. No, I'm sorry.
The language in the movie is all made up.
In the movie, it's the language that they make up. That, like, I think it was the director that tries to go to the actual islands and speaks language like it. Oh, was it Harryhausen?
Harryhausen.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Harryhausen had the commentary on the track, and he goes to the like Neos Islands or whatever. He tried to use a line from the movie, and the guy was like, "What are you talking about in English?" He's like, "Yeah, I don't think they speak that way."
I mean, these islanders are generic tribesmen,
from Africa.
Not even from Africa, the actual place on a planet populated by humans, but the Africa that is deepest, darkest Africa from like Tarzan serials and stuff.
But yeah, this is pulp magazine stuff.
Oh,
you know, this
absolutely.
is Edgar Rice Burroughs even. I mean, it doesn't have really once you get to that island, you are not like the reality button is been turned off. You know, and once you see Kong for the first time, it's like all hell breaks loose.
Yeah.
You know, and even the dinosaurs, like, they may look like dinosaurs that you can look up in like a science book, but they aren't functioning on like you have a brontosaurus that point blank like eats people, and you know, like this is like
real, dude.
this. Yeah,
you don't mess with Skull Island. It's its own thing. You don't.
Yeah,
brontosaurus
Skull Island is
people. It's great. Like you
it's
don't want to mess around.
It's sort of Jurassic Park as imagined by H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and there's this comment early on where they say that the all of the architecture, like the big wall and all that stuff, is actually built by more advanced previous people who have fallen to. In other words, we're not looking per se at primitives as they've always been. We're looking at new primitives, who over the past millennia have become these, but how previously there was some advanced race that's built the giant wall and stuff like that. Now, Peter Jackson...
Wouldn't that be crazy if it was an advanced race that, created their own demise by reviving giant creatures?
Oh, my God, yeah. Well, I mean, there's also the possibility that if this were the Filmation Tarzan cartoon from the 70s, the advanced race is probably just hanging out in like a pyramid in the jungle somewhere and we can run into them. They're probably looking through their little advanced race periscope going, hey, WTF, guys, there's a bunch of white people from New York who are, like, trying to steal one of our apes. But,
yeah.
I
absolutely love that composite shot where they're on the beach and you see the wall and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you see, oh, man, it's so good. You just,
there's one where
you
they're
look at
looking
it and
from
you're like,
the
this
deck.
is 1933, and then you see, like, terrible movies where the compositing is just crappy. And you're like, dude, this is done in 33. Like, really? Like, we can't do better? There was no After Effects. Like, I could, for $50 a month, you can make something infinite. Like, you have access to something infinitely more powerful than anything that these guys had, or, anybody on the crew, guys, girls, whoever was creating this. Like, it's just so weird. It's just so strange that's, Although I will give it up. The one, like, the scene in the 2005 Kong with the insects eating the guys, man.
Well,
that
there's
gives me
actually,
the
a scene that was cut
big
from the
time.
original and has never been seen again in the original movie.
Oh,
Where,
yeah, they try to read through it.
Yeah, 4 sailors are eaten by giant spiders. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People were so distracted by it that they were, like, leaving the theater or talking through the rest of the movie, so they decided to pull it, and then it was never shown again.
I've often felt that way about movie scenes or movie endings where I felt as though the director didn't seem to be aware that he had created a scene that was maybe powerful, maybe really well done, but so out of step with the rest of the picture that you kind of like, I'm just going to think about that now, and I'm lost to you because I'm still thinking about that incredible scene. Which is, think how rough it must be for you as an artist to go, this is super good, but it doesn't involve in this. It doesn't belong in this work because it's getting in the way, and that's a tough one. I mean, I don't know. I've seen that several times though, where I thought like, that is a great ending, but it's so overpowering that it's going to kill the rest of the picture. And I don't go back. If that happens, I don't watch that movie again. Whereas if that didn't happen, or this big violent thing didn't happen, or whatever, and your mileage may vary, you have to pick one that actually. In the case of King Kong, it was affecting everybody, so it really justified taking out. Whereas other times, I think it might be fair to say that it's just Jason's opinion, and there's no reason to that they necessarily would have. But. So Kong, let's see. We talked about how he stomps on and eats people. There are no other giant apes. That means, look, Kong had to have parents. Okay, at the very least, Kong had to have parents.
Yeah, was he created by radiation too? Like Godzilla?
Well, no. Unless it was naturally occurring,
Yeah, Kong's a giant mammal.
It was a pre-atomic age.
Yeah. So if he's not magical, if Prospero didn't just grab a gorilla and make him giant, or just create a giant gorilla out of whole cloth, we have to assume that Kong was born like a mammal, born alive by way of a couple other apes who are, I guess, dead now. Now, is Kong hundreds of years old? I mean, it's to some extent these are things you're not supposed to think about. This is a fairy tale. This is a giant ape.
Sure.
And he is just by himself, Now, Peter Jackson had Kong looking out on an elephant graveyard of Kong bones, like, prior giant apes. So,
yeah.
He thought about that a little bit. But I like Tony's theory, actually, that the advanced race created giant races of creatures, including, I guess, the Kongs. And now Kong somehow is the last one. In other words, they're finally about to die out. And after the sojourn to New York, they will die out unless we accept that the next movie actually exists in continuity with this movie, which is Son of Kong, which I haven't seen probably since like Saturday afternoon sometime in the 80s. So I can't even begin to comment on Son of Kong.
Well, at the end of that, the entire island sinks. So.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, you gotta love the 30s, man. I love just the crazy logic of 1930s movies. That's wonderful.
There were giant apes during prehistoric times. Like there were more Ice Age type creatures. But I mean, I know again, don't think they were too worried about the actual science of the thing. So, I mean, if we are just to say, well, this is an island that's covered with prehistoric creatures for whatever reason, it does stand to reason there could possibly be giant apes on there.
Oh, no, I agree. I'm just, I'm more worried about the fact that there's only one of them. You know, that's somehow, it's fascinating because the whole world of these natives is built around dealing with Kong, which means probably in their memory there's only been Kong.
But maybe they think every single ape is all Kong.
No. What's that, Tony?
I bet somewhere after this movie there's a millionaire who has a huge mansion, or maybe like Howard Hughes' hangar, who eventually ends up with a huge Kong skin rug. Like some billionaire was just like, oh, well, you're walking on giant ape. Just
way to bum everybody out, Tony.
We suck that because we suck that bad. Dude, well, this is what we're talking about. We take the final
going to have to remove
ape,
that
and
ape.
we're like, throw a bunch of. The guy knows there's something there. He's like, he's got the grenades, which I still think is awesome that Harry got one of those like grenades. Because I've gotten to see it since then. But, man, that was awesome. Anyway, like, there.
Yeah, you're right. They've got to get rid of that body.
And then, we took him and said, oh no, he's gonna be completely cool just hanging out in chains. Like, look at this. We charge $10 a head. This will be awesome. And then, somewhere somebody like I like to envision this insane world where some billionaire. Howard Hughes guy has this like, oh well, man, what is this? Oh yeah,
there was
that giant ape. Yeah, he's now a rug, the biggest, like a football field size rug or whatever.
There was a novel when they did the Peter Jackson remake that attempted to do straight up Jurassic Park, where it was about a clone of King Kong, and I forget what it was called. But it did kind of have like the idea that some rich guy had the remains of Kong on ice.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
What a great idea. It's funny when they did the De Laurentiis version, they actually had an enormous model of Kong built that they laid out on the street so all the actors could gather around it, and some people did in fact make off with parts of the Kong.
That became, if you remember, that became like a trope, like the Kong head and the physical Kong hands and stuff. You would see those in movies when there were like people would like in comedies, especially where people would have one or like it was really like this thing that kept showing up in different movies. Like, oh look, it's a Kong hand, and then not little miniature, but the 56 centimeter high model just sold at auction in 2009 for like $200,000.
Oh wow!
Oh yeah!
Wow!
So that's still out there.
So good.
How much did you say? Just
200,000.
Oh well, thank God. All right, but wow. Okay, so here, answer me a question. This is just a nerdy question. I see a lot of publicity shots from King Kong in books and stuff, and I could swear that some of these shots are not in the movie. Did they?
Well, and the publicity shots are completely different. Like the size of King Kong is completely different in the publicity shots than in the posters, than it is. I shouldn't say the publicity shots, but the posters than he is in Ireland than he is in New York. Like he's completely different sizes comparatively to all that. Because in the posters they say he's 50 feet tall, but like compared to people and buildings and stuff, he's like 25 feet tall in New York and like 18 feet tall on the island. So that's not super consistent, but
But I'm saying that a lot of times I'll see you'll look at a monster movie book, and it'll have shots of King Kong, and his face and his physicality, his body look different from the way he looks.
You also notice that the one where they have him, like the articulated face, it's like where they show later on, looks a good bit different. Like it moves differently and everything, just because of the nature of that, setup. Like it looks a lot different when he's kind of like looking around and stuff like that. And you cut to when he's looking around, when he's peering in the window, where he's going to grab Bay Ray. Like that looks different than that. And so, and also you build a bunch of those things, like, they break down. I mean, that's why we don't have a lot of props from.
Apparently, they were breaking
movies.
down during the making of this film. The
Sure.
camera lights were melting. They'd melt his face, which was rubber, and so they'd replace him with another face. So maybe that explains it, because I see a lot of pictures of Kong, and his face will be more elongated. And I'm not talking about other movies. I'm talking about shots of King Kong.
Yeah.
It just doesn't look like the ape from the movie, and so it makes me wonder, how many of these shots, publicity shots.
Also, some of the publicity shots can be taken early on. I don't know if it's in this case, but some of them could be taken early on, and they go, well, let's go back to the drawing board, right?
Yeah.
Because they want to hype it. Look, we're making this giant, ape movie.
Yeah.
And so you'll take a bunch of pictures and stuff like that, and people go, whoa, giant ape movie. What are they doing over there? And then other studios are like, man, we better have a giant ape movie. That's the next big thing. Or that'll never sell, or however they do it. But so it could be. And I know there's a couple people I know that I could just ask, when were these publicity pictures taken or whatever, that you could find out the answer. But just going off of what you know and remember, there's always who knows when those are taken along the way until you sit down with a Kong book and go, okay, that's this is taken at this stage, etc.
It's so funny to think of the King Kong that shows up in King Kong versus Godzilla, and that was what Drew mentioned earlier. And that guy, he looks like it's silly. I mean, it's a big King Kong suit, and he has a floppy face, not unlike Godzilla himself. And what's funny to me is, though, that this movie is so well known that that's what is that, 1966 or something? And so it's 30 years later.
I don't think that. I think it's earlier than that.
Oh, okay. All right. I don't know. It's the 60s. It's definitely the 60s. So let's see. Is it called King Kong versus Godzilla or Godzilla versus King Kong?
King Kong versus Godzilla. Kong was top billed.
Kong was top billed. Yes. All right. That came out in 1862. All right. So it's still 29 years later, and Kong is such a big deal that people are like, yeah, I'm going to go watch King Kong fight Godzilla. I think it probably has to do with the fact that Kong had been playing on TV, so that people were familiar with it and so forth.
Sure.
It's funny.
I will have to say that when you mentioned it being on TV, it wasn't until I saw, I guess I don't know if you were there too. I saw Benumathon, we get to see this archival print, and that's the one they used for the Blu-ray, and it was so different. Having seen clips where you'll see Kong intercut with different things, and for commercials or for on different just tons of TV, Kong was such a big deal that you see those kind of faded copies or whatever, and seeing an archival print, a brand new struck, restored, just awesome print, that really changed it for me. I mean, that was something to behold.
I agree.
If any of those prints actually come to anywhere that you're close to, you have to see it. It's so different than seeing it on a VHS or seeing it on some Saturday morning thing where, who knows where those elements came from, or who laid those to tape or whatever that got shown on TV.
Well, a lot of times when you watch those pictures, they're all washed out and white and crackly, and you can't see anything. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, I totally agree. It was often washed out. It was kind of blurry, I think, a lot of the elements. Yeah. And in some ways that kind of softens up some of the,
the composite.
The way that they're compositing. Yeah. Also, when you touch a stop motion thing, especially something with fur, it kind of has that ripply effect. Yeah. And they even talked about, going back and kind of smoothing that out in one of the restorations. I don't know if they ever did that, but I was like, I don't think you want to do that. There's a certain charm to that aspect.
Well, and that was the work that was done. I mean, I always loved I love Ray Harryhausen's explanation for it on the commentary on the DVD that came out when the Peter Jackson version was released. Yeah. It was well, that's just the wind blowing his hair around. And as a kid, As a kid, when I was watching it, I never thought twice about the hair
Nope.
moving because it was a moving creature. And it's only when we get older and more jaded that we start having to come up with, I don't even really need any explanation for that.
I couldn't care less. If you are so bothered by the ripple effects on Kong's fur that you can't enjoy King Kong, then you can't really watch King Kong. I mean, it's just as simple as that, because you're also going to be distracted by all the stop motion animated humans and all that stuff. And what we've talked about this many times, because on this podcast we spend as much time in old movies as we do contemporary movies. And I mean, truly, we never make realism demands on ancient literature. We don't ask ancient poems to be like prose. And somehow we find it impossible to suspend our disbelief when it comes to older special effects. And I can't wrap my head around why. I mean, if you have...
And this is really, I know there's been a lot of ink spilled about this movie, but like, if you care at all about fantasy films, about horror films, about adventure films, about special effects films, like, really, like, a good 80, if not 99% of the movies that we have watched on this podcast probably would not exist if it wasn't for Kong, like, really busting open a lot of, like, this was the Jurassic Park of its time. This was the Independence Day of its time. This is the Avatar of its time. And it's so important to the language of film. And if you claim to be have any care about film history, like, this is a movie. Even if you can just watch it, even if you're not going to watch it with the reverence that we're coming at it, you just want to watch it as a student. You need to be able to come at it from that angle.
Yeah. I think truly, it's true. If you're going to call yourself a student of film, you have to be willing to get over what I regard as a kind of juvenile obsession with, does something look realistic to the eyes of somebody who's already seen a lot of hyper realistic stuff? Because I think that it's a losing battle, and it doesn't really answer a great deal. It has only one answer, which is that the technology keeps getting better.
And when I was a kid, certainly, like, the special effects in the monster films of my day were better than the ones here. But
Absolutely.
I didn't look at it at this like, I was able to suspend my disbelief. And I guess I've carried that with me into adulthood, because when I watch this, I don't go, oh, well, there's a stop motion monkey there. It's like, no, there's King Kong.
There's King Kong. Exactly. Once again, if you go to see a no play, and the actors have strange whitened faces, and you don't stand up and go, act like real people. This is only with cinema that we have this bizarre notion that everything has to be real enough and an illusion enough that I don't have to do any work. I don't know.
Well, not everything needs to be super realistic. Like, this has this sort of dreamlike quality that I think if it was hyper real, it would lose. Like, the stop motion effects have this very, again, like, I hate to keep hammering that phrase over, but there's a dreaminess to it.
There is a dreaminess that especially comes in when they first introduce the island in all the fog, and they move through a blanket of fog until they find the island. And you're right.
By the way, I love that scene when they're in the fog and he's calling out the depths and he's yelling out, and it's just, they're kind of like getting the suspense of like, how close are we? What's going on? We don't see anything. It's such a cheap scene for them to film, and it was such an effective one.
Oh, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. All that takes is just like 4 actors on a rail and another sailor.
A fog machine.
Yeah, and a fog machine. It is. You're just like, it's so scary for them. They know they're nearing an island that they don't see. Just gorgeous. Anyway, I had one more question, and then we totally need to wrap up because I know we're going to go long with King Kong.
Right all the time.
But so, is this the first movie where we are urged to root for the monster in the way that we end up, because I think I really wanted Kong to, I didn't necessarily want Kong to keep killing people because he's clearly doing that, but you do find yourself rooting for him despite everything. And I'm wondering, is this the first one that does that, or can we think of any really valid prior examples that are good examples to throw out?
Well, I mean,
the only one that comes to mind,
Kong is almost more like, you look at like the Universal monsters, and up until they roll out with the Wolfman, who is so empathetic.
Yeah.
Frankenstein. You empathize with Frankenstein and Dracula, but I don't think you empathize with them quite as much as you empathize with Kong.
Well, the Frankenstein monster is pretty damn sad. So
Yeah.
I agree with you about Dracula. Dracula does not beg for your sympathy.
I never root for Dracula.
Yeah, but Frankenstein is very sad. You do, so that's a good one, I guess. And that's 1931. So that's 2 years before this. I don't remember in the Phantom of the Opera. I'd have to go back and watch the Silent Phantom from 25. But if I recall, he's a sort of a pitiful story. But I don't remember ever feeling like, because he's human and he's doing terrible things, you're long past worrying about, whether you're not hoping that he makes it,
The Phantom in the Lon Chaney version to me is almost more like Hannibal Lecter. He's sort of magnetic, but he's not.
Right.
Again, that level of empathy is not like what you have for Kong.
Yeah, I think Kong is kind of special, and maybe it's because
maybe the Hunchback of Notre Dame, though.
Yeah, I would say definitely Hunchback.
Yeah, no, that's a good example. I think you're right. So the closest example we can come up with for a monster, so-called, who demands that we root for him, that urges us to root for him, would be Quasimodo and then King Kong. That's
yeah, but King Kong is like so much. I agree that it's the abused animal thing and whatever, but he's so much more vicious than any of these others that you've mentioned. Because
Frankenstein's pretty brutal in the
Frankenstein doesn't deliberately kill people. He accidentally.
Oh yeah, he does.
I can't remember.
Oh yeah, no, he Fritz, the Dwight Fry Hunchback character. He straight up murders them.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I don't know.
But the girl he kills accidentally. He kills the
girl
he kills up accidentally. But
this is more like a dog. Imagine if you had like a wounded dog that you, for some reason, set loose in the Galleria. Yes, that dog is going to bite people, and you're still going to just be cringing all along because you know that somebody's going to end up shooting this dog.
And now you're putting forth the horror movie version of Clifford.
Well, that's sort of my point, though. Like as an animal, we are more forgiving of Kong. Like the Karloff Frankenstein, the Karloff version of Frankenstein. You have a lot of sympathy, but he's still human to a point.
Yeah.
Even though he's this patchwork thing.
Yeah.
He's human enough to where you kind of hold him a little bit more accountable than you hold Kong. Kong is an animal, and so he's got kind of a get out of hell free card.
Well, that's a pretty good point too, because you could also argue that you feel more for the Frankenstein's monster in the movie than you do in the book because he's even more intelligent in the book. And so,
you're absolutely right.
By making him kind of like, oh, look, he didn't know any better than to throw that girl in there.
That's right.
He kind of
but now we've gotten
the same
into
thing with the.
we gotta go around and do the
three
of the Karloff Frankensteins eventually.
Why you have Kong is he is an animal, and so that's why you're more sympathetic because Frankenstein's monster in the book eventually. And not entirely his fault, becomes a really callous, wrathful creature.
There's
and
a moment
he's very
where he kills.
He's learned at that point.
He kills William. This is his fault. There's a point in the book where he kills William, and he actually takes the dead. he takes Justine's locket and places it on the boy to frame somebody else for the murder. That is not a stupid animal.
No. And that's why we're able to feel, I think, a little bit more for the.
That is one conniving French-speaking zombie. By the time you get to that guy, yeah.
Like we feel for it because he's kind of, and you're like, oh man, well, he's misunderstood. Whereas
that's
can't
the version
do that
of Frank. That's something that we also that Kong and Frankenstein have in common is that because the Karloff version is so iconic and so well known and so much more sympathetic, pretty much. I mean, you very seldom see versions of Frankenstein where they allow the monster to actually be kind of scary anymore. The last one that I can think where they really, really tried was the Robert De Niro one back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There have been several versions since, which I have not seen. I can't even comment on, but I keep coming across them and go, oh my God, there's another one? What, William Hurt? What's this? And I don't know.
I just watched a found footage Frankenstein, which was kind of dull, but called The Frankenstein Theory, which it was an interesting movie, but it was a little dull at times.
We definitely have to stop talking about Frankenstein.
Your fault. Your subject.
Yeah, I know.
You brought it on yourself, Jason.
Okay.
Well,
King Kong. We should wrap up though, because we've been going. This is definitely a long episode because it's a really great movie, and I feel like we could probably do several episodes just on the things to be learned in King Kong. But we should wrap up. So, okay, same direction. I can't remember. It seems like we did Drew, Julia, Tony. Final thoughts, King Kong. Then we'll come around for endorsements and talk about what's coming next, which is going to be an exciting retrospective that I can't wait to do. So, Drew, final thoughts, King Kong 33.
I kind of summed it up earlier. If you consider yourself a serious genre movie fan and you have not seen King Kong, what the hell is wrong with you? I mean, really, this is just such a... I actually, having talked about it, I want to go watch King Kong again. And I've watched all of the remakes, the original version twice, and I could go watch this movie again. I love King Kong. I think it's a great movie. It's definitely the original giant monster movie, or at least the seminal giant monster movie. And so all these other movies that we've been talking about certainly would not exist without this movie. But a lot of other movies that aren't, like I don't think Jaws would exist without King Kong. I don't, stuff that you would not think are necessarily related to Kong still relate back to Kong. This is just such an important movie.
Very, very good. All right, Julia, final thoughts, King Kong.
Well, we could say so much more about this if we talk about the political context and all the social meanings behind it and all those kind of things. But I feel like that would just be another hour. So, but I think that as far artistically, we're probably talking about the music too. I don't think we talked about the music. But there's all kinds of wonderful things about it, and I do think we've hit on some of the more, at least the more fun themes, if not the more important ones. So I'm really glad that we did it, and I enjoyed it very much.
I'm dying to follow up with you about what the more important ones we skipped are, but let's not even get into it now because. Well,
no, I just mean that's what I mean, like the political.
Yeah, we might actually trigger an hour-long conversation. So, all right, Tony, final thoughts, King Kong.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know how much more I can add other than, how cool is it we watched a movie that had an overture before the movie even started. Like,
exactly.
Wow, and it's awesome too. Like the themes, like. That's also of a time, Yeah, just like, and by the way, here's the overture or the score for the movie, and it just is a title card. That's just cool as a musician and as a score kind of buff.
Absolutely,
that's really, really cool too. But I just like I said before, if you can ever see one of the restored prints, especially in 35 millimeter, it's getting harder and harder to see it, but you really should. If they they run that around again, or if you have to live where a cool theater does that.
Yeah.
I do it. Like, but if you can't, the Blu-ray is struck from that, supposedly. So that's really, really cool. I streamed it because somehow I don't. You look in your collection and you remember sometimes, like, why don't I have that movie on Blu-ray? I have no idea why I don't have King Kong on Blu-ray. It's just completely crazy. But yeah, so I streamed it. But definitely see that when you can, because it's a totally different experience. And seeing it with a crowd too. That's what's kind of cool.
I really enjoyed getting back to this, and it makes me want to go and sort of watch some of the other Kongs just to see how they comment on them, and to remember that this is a movie that has been put into by the American Film Institute into the top films in film history. So this is an important film, whereas a lot of stuff we talk about is very much inside baseball. It's stuff that you'll watch if you're one of us geeks. But this is a truly great film with a lot to think about and to say. So awesome. All right, let's do endorsements, and then I'll tell you about the next retrospective coming up. So, Drew, what do you have to endorse for us this week?
I watched on Netflix a whopping 3-hour-long documentary called Never Sleep Again, and it's all about the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Not giant monsters, so it doesn't tie into what we've been talking about, but if you are an 80s horror fan, which is also, very much something that I love, this is an excellent movie to watch because it talks a lot about what the film industry was like at the time where we had this horror boom in the 1980s. And it's just fascinating. They have interviews with all of the people that were very much involved with literally the entire Nightmare series, all the way up to Freddy versus Jason. But I wish they had some stuff about the remake in it, just because I would have liked to have known a little bit more about the making of that movie. Not because I think it's a great movie, but it just would have been an interesting way to cap it off. But that's neither here nor there. Like it was a really, really fascinating documentary, and if you have Netflix, you can watch it tonight if you don't want to go to sleep at all. Not because you'll be having nightmares, but because it's 3 hours long.
Sure. And it promises that you will never sleep again.
Never sleep again. The other thing, though, that does tie in to what we've been talking about, when the Peter Jackson Kong came out, they put out a book called A Natural History of Skull Island. And it's basically a zoology book about Skull Island. And if you are able to get your hands on this, it's wonderful. It's got all the dinosaurs and all the creatures, and it talks about the species of ape that Kong is. And it has the rat monkey from Dead Alive, if you're a Peter Jackson fan as well, so which also from Skull Island. So it's good stuff, and it's kind of pricey the times I've seen it at conventions lately. I got mine at Half Price Books a few years ago, so I got it for like under $10. And I guess now it's kind of hard to get a hold of because I've seen it for upwards of like $50 at conventions. If you can find it cheap and you're a Kong fan, get it.
Very cool.
Now I'm sad I don't have that because I certainly don't have the money to spend. I much prefer the half-price books price that you said. Yeah, darn.
Well, yeah, but you live near Drew, so you can.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
All right, Julia, do you have any endorsements for us this week?
Well, I don't have anything new, but when you were talking earlier about the time period, like how the 30s were way more risque, and then after post-war we get to this like crazy. I just was remembering how wonderful the movie Pleasantville was in portraying that, and that whole pristine, like nobody in this universe is ever naked or, God forbid, have sex or anything else. So I don't know. So I was just thinking that would be a fun movie to revisit, Pleasantville. If you haven't seen it, you should see it.
Yeah. In fact, I should mention you mentioned the code. I was talking about the Hays Code. Here's what you were not allowed to do under the Hays Code, which they started enforcing in 1934, which is the year after.
And it was government or just?
No, it was industry, but I'm sure that it was because usually when they do this, it's because they're afraid that the government's about to start getting involved. So it was done by it lasted until 1968, which kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Sure.
But you weren't allowed to show pointed profanity, meaning God, Lord, Jesus, or Christ, or hell, or damn, or God, G-A-W-D. You couldn't have licentious or suggestive nudity in fact or in silhouette, and any lecherous or licentious notice thereof by other characters in the picture. You couldn't have drug trafficking.
So that explains a lot about why James Bond goes off the way it does, because as soon as they lift those restrictions, they're like, let's go for it all the way.
No, it's a good point. And Bond comes around in '62.
Really?
So basically the code had just started slipping, honestly.
Yeah.
But and you've also got all kinds of ways around it. You could release a movie that was unrated. You could release an indie picture, But you couldn't have sex perversion. That means anything that you want it to mean. White slavery, which means sex slavery.
But you could have black slavery.
Presumably, you could have black slavery. Miscegenation, which was this word for blacks and whites having relations. Sex hygiene and venereal diseases. You couldn't have actual childbirth. Although you could have them in industrial films. If you made a movie educational, quote unquote, then you could have actual childbirth. You couldn't show naked children. You couldn't ridicule the clergy, and you could not willfully offend any nation, race, or creed, which is nice.
They didn't. I don't know if they stuck with that, but
yeah. Then there's a whole bunch of warning stuff that they couldn't do. Like it was like, you can do the rest of this stuff, but be careful about it. The use of the flag, international relations, arson, use of firearms, sedition, sympathy for criminals. That's why around in the 30s and 40s, if you've got a movie about let's say you got a movie about two brothers who grow up in a tough neighborhood and one becomes a gangster and the other becomes a priest. You have to be really careful and make sure that the gangster really gets it in the end. Otherwise, yeah. I mean, he has to receive his punishment.
Sympathy for the devil? Is that in there?
There is no reference to sympathy for the devil,
all right,
but I'm sure they would have been against it.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, this has been your brief recap of the Hays Code. I'm sorry, I got in the way of Tony. It's your turn to endorse.
I'm drawing a blank as far as endorsements, so I'm gonna go with Drew's endorsements because those are good.
All right, excellent, no problem. And my endorsement actually this week, two endorsements. One is a book that King Kong made me think of.
I did think of something. And I can't remember if it. There's only a few hours left, so you might miss it if you listen to this late. But I think you can still donate. The American Genre Film Archive here in Austin is preserving crazy films that probably otherwise wouldn't get preserved. And they're running an Indiegogo campaign to restore a truly crazy movie, but it's pretty awesome in its craziness, called The Sorcerer. But they're slowly, because sometimes they may loan out the only copy of a movie that exists that they know of or that we know of. And so they're slowly trying to digitize, doing 2K versions of these digital files. And they house these movies, they rent them out, so it's an archive that's not, you can actually get these crazy movies, or, some of them are less crazy and just like, wow, how did this ever get made, that kind of thing. And that's housed here in Austin, so it helps pay for, the storage of these movies, et cetera. I'll post a link, of course. but they're really, really, and it's kind of an association, it's a pet project that started with Tim League and Lars and those guys, hauling truckloads of movies that were going to be either just destroyed or thrown into the ocean, actually. that we have this crazy archive that's here that people can watch all this stuff. There's a ton of martial arts movies, which is near and dear to my heart, as well as just things that you would never see or that people probably would be like, that's trash. Why should I ever preserve that?
Preserve. Yeah.
But that's something they're doing, and it's really awesome. This Indiegogo campaign, it's been really cool. I think they got funded today finally, but I think you can still give, and I think it's a worthy thing to have, that people are still fighting for. These are actual 35 millimeter prints, and they're fighting to preserve them in a place as well as digitally preserve them for the future, because who knows when it runs through a projector what can happen on some of these films. So something really, really near and dear to my heart. I think it's pretty awesome. And I think there's probably more than a few films in that archive that people who listen to this podcast should be concerned that they preserve. And unsung gems, as well as, something that along the way we might cover when we go, wow, I can't believe that this is a thing that exists and we're going to talk about it. And, this is a horror movie that could have been lost if it weren't for these people preserving these films. So that's it for me there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I want you to put a link, if you could, onto our Castle of Horror page, because
yes,
I
definitely.
think that sounds wonderful. Yeah, I've seen you share that, and it sounds like an enormously good cause. All right, and by the way, if you come to our Facebook page, there are so many conversations going on all the time, and sub-conversations and arguments, and it's really great. And we always want more. So we've had some of the strangest arguments on there about Godzilla, and I have a feeling that King Kong might wind up that way as well. So all right, Lost in Shangri-La is the book that I'm recommending. It's by Mitchell Zuckoff, and this is a book about it's 1945. And you had a bunch of Army servicemen and WACs, which is women in the Army. They're in New Guinea. It's 45. They are periodically, they'll take these R&R flights on this plane that holds, like 8 or so of them, down into what was called a hidden valley. And, so they would leave the Army base, and they would fly over this valley and look at the pretty flowers, and sometimes they would see natives and so forth. Vast valley. Anyway, one fine day, they crash. And there's really no way out. The U.S. Army had to figure out a way to send another plane in to rescue them, while the people who had survived the crash had to figure out how to survive, how to deal with whatever wounds they had, and also how to avoid not being slaughtered by the natives who had never seen modern people before and assumed that these were gods who had literally dropped in from heaven and probably were not to be trusted, or maybe were involved in some kind of war with...
The Picard.
Yes. So it's fascinating. All those cliches you ever heard about, like, the character falls, crashes his plane and the natives think he's a god, that actually happens in this book. The book is called Lost in Shangri-La, and it's fantastic. So the other thing, really quickly, I posted on, I can't remember if I posted it on the Castle of Horror page, but I will. I'm a huge fan of, and I apologize for bringing it up again, Ghost and Mrs. Muir, huge fan of the TV series, kind of obsessed with it. It's very sad. Ran for 2 years, not available on DVD, so nobody knows it exists. Anyway, the little girl who was on that show was interviewed by ABC in Australia, and she has a new interview up very recently. So I'll post that. So that's my endorsement. And okay, coming up next week, we start a new retrospective, which is all about Drew. More to the point, it's all about the fact that
Drew's home movies.
Drew's fantastic new comic, Halloween Man versus Invisible Man, is coming to Comixology, and we are super excited about it. And so we thought, what would be fun to do? We thought, we're going to pick some movies that sort of hearken to the theme of Halloween Man, which is basically a superhero zombie, versus Invisible Man. So
we'll do Drew's home movies, and then we're going to pull out Tony Salvaggio's breakdancing video from the 80s.
Luckily, that has been taped over as far as I know. But still, we have the bet. We have the bet of if Clockworks or Psychom gets made into a film, there's a new breakdancing video that will happen on that date that it premieres.
But yes, we're gonna do Invisible Man, a couple Invisible Man movies. We're gonna do some heroic monster movies. So that retrospective is going to get more specific really soon. But I know for sure that we're coming back next week with The Invisible Man, and it's going to rock.
Which is also a great film.
I haven't seen it in a long, long time, so I have no memory. I'm sure that you're right. So
I've read the book.
I'm looking forward to that a lot more than I'm looking forward to any of the splatter horror that you guys are wanting to bring on later on in the season.
Man,
we're gonna spare you a lot of that.
When are we going to do a Jess Franco series? I want to do, a slimy-ass, grainy, 70s clothes-wearing, hairy people-looking Jess Franco, grungy horror.
All right, well, we'll talk about that.
I think the key that we found here is you have to find a way to tie it into something you're promoting.
Yeah.
All right,
because we're all about the self-promotion here.
Yes.
And we're building up to our 100th episode in a few
that's right.
Here.
This is I think this is episode 88 that we're doing right now, and so we're rocketing towards episode 100, which will kick off our demonic possession series. So episode 100 is going to be I'm not even going to say it. All right.
The scariest movie of all time.
Thank you, everybody. We will see you around. Like us on Facebook, share us. Leave us reviews on iTunes. Tell us where we're wrong on the Facebook page.
Don't do that.
Stitcher. Do whatever. we are totally, generally interested, and I will argue with you all soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.